was inspired by the speakers this morning, and I just kept wanting to say, Peter, you're right, you're right. And Jackie's comments about what we need to do to prepare for a changing world and a more international world. And part of what I'm going to share is what we think are some of the solutions. So quick show of hands, because I don't do anything that is purely lecture-based. It will be interactive. How many of you know about Minerva? Just so I have an idea. Okay, a handful. So let me talk a little bit about it. So first thing I'll just point out is I took the question mark off the slide. Anybody notice that? If you look in your program, the future of higher education, it had a question mark. I think we're doing some things that are starting to push in a new direction, and I would challenge especially those of you at universities, take a few gems and maybe think about some of the things you're doing, because I do think as academics, as those who are preparing the next leaders, the next innovators, and the generation that's going to make decisions of consequence for all of us, that we need to push forward in what we're thinking about with education. So I will just give some context for American universities. Very often they're considered some of the best. And we have obviously students from all over the world who go to the US, but they are failing. They're failing to deliver an education that will prepare them for what's to come. So I'm not going to spend much time on these statistics, just to say it's consistent, whether you're doing some research here in Scotland specifically, in the broader UK, within Europe, within the US. Most chief academic officers believe that they are preparing the students. Why else would we do it? Nobody is going and teaching students with the hope that there aren't wonderful outcomes. That said, when you ask the exact same employers as some of the surveys you've seen earlier today, they're saying the students are coming out and they're not prepared. Okay, again, I won't spend time on that since we've already covered it. Again, some other statistics you saw earlier. The jobs of the future don't even exist today. So how do we prepare students accordingly? And that there are some core skills. Peter touched on these earlier in more detail. There are core skills that employers are looking for. Critical thinking, creative thinking, the ability to work in teams, to interact with others, to communicate. Those are core skills that everyone needs, regardless of what functional area they're in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Minerva. And this is in some ways the punchline. But I'm going to share it right now, because as someone starts talking about, oh, here's a new model in education, very often you're going to sit there and wonder, well, does it work? So I'm putting the proof point at the very beginning. We gave our students an objective assessment, something called the Collegiate Learning Assessment Plus, put out by the Council of Aid for Education. It's a nonprofit organization that is measuring learning at a variety of institutions. Over 400 universities in the States use the Collegiate Learning Assessment to measure progress from freshman year through senior year. We gave our students that assessment at the beginning of their freshman year, at the beginning of their first year, and 8 months later, after 8 months of our experience in our curriculum. And what we found is they came in as freshmen. They are high-performing students, and I'll talk a little bit about who the students are at Minerva, and I'll go through the case study. But they came in performing very high against other freshmen, but compared to other seniors at other universities, they were in the 78th percentile. 8 months later, they scored in the 99th percentile. So what that means is that we saw progress among our students that is unparalleled to what other universities have seen. And the president of CAE has now come out and made those statements, that we can see progress, we can see learning, and we can see learning in the kinds of skills that we know the workforce is looking for: critical thinking, creative problem solving, effective communication. So we really can move the needle. Okay, so how do we do it? How do we prepare them? So I'm going to go through now and give you a high-level sort of overview of what we're doing, what we're thinking about, and why we do it. It's impossible to talk about Minerva in 20 minutes, but I'm going to do my best. So first, though, you have to understand that when we started thinking about a new university experience, we had to think about holistically, how are we going to prepare the students for jobs that don't exist, for a future that's more technology enabled, for a world that has big, big problems. Everything from environmental change to how do we prevent war? How do we think about the world's food supply? I mean, we've got big, complex problems to solve, so we want our education to help prepare them to answer those questions. So it starts with, what should they learn? Well, we took a very principled approach when we started thinking about this. We thought about what are the goals for our graduates. If someone is going to invest 4 years in an undergraduate education, what should they come out with? And we came out with 4 goals. We want them to be able to make wise decisions. Wisdom is a really important thing to develop. And it doesn't come from just learning in a bunch of textbooks. Wise decision-making comes from learning, but also applying. And it is really important to put things into many, many different contexts to build experience base to start driving towards wise decision-making. Meaningful innovation, not just being creative for the sake of being creative, but where do we have gaps? Where do we need to think about important innovations that, again, will impact society? We want them to be broad thinking. It's one thing to become an engineer and be the best coder ever. But if you don't understand the bigger problems, you don't understand what you're trying to solve, having that functional expertise is only one part of the puzzle. So how do we prepare our students to be broad thinkers? And how do we prepare them to be global? Now, all of these things you're going to go, well, that's all obvious. And thanks to Peter and Jackie's comments earlier, you say, well, we know that. Can you teach it? And the answer is, you can. You can when you start breaking it down into what are the core competencies you need to teach. Critical thinking, creative thinking, effective communication, and effective interaction. Now, let me ask, again, show of hands, for those of you at academic institutions, how many of you think and believe you teach critical thinking? It's probably on your website somewhere. Show of hands? All right. So if I asked you, for those of you who raised hands, sorry on live streaming you don't see the raised hands, but if I asked you, how do you teach it? It's actually a really hard question to answer. And many universities will say, well, we have them, our students take a broad series of classes. We have them take some from column A and some from column C and a few electives. And by taking all this diversity, they actually are exposed to a range of different topics, and they start to see the world maybe in a more complex way. The problem is, it has to be intentional. Learning outcomes don't happen by magic. But we do believe that you can curate a curriculum to actually teach these things. And at Minerva, one of the ways we've done it is we've broken down these 4 core competencies into over 100 habits of mind and foundational concepts. How do you train the brain to work? Peter said there is a whole science around learning, the science of learning. There are people who've been studying this for decades, but most universities don't systematically use it. We do. So how do you train the mind? What is a habit of mind, a foundational concept? Well, let me give you some ideas. So 2 of the core competencies we teach are really about personal skills. How do I critically think and then creatively problem solve? Evaluating claims. How many times is a claim thrown out to you, whether it's in a newspaper, in a research study? How do people react to that claim? We teach our students how to break it down, how to ask the critical questions. If there's a research study and 72% of the people responded, well, the first question you should ask is, who did you ask? How big was the sample size? What was the probability for error? Understanding how to take information that is coming at you how to actually compartmentalize it, to consume it, to draw conclusions. Again, a lot of these words Peter talked about earlier, because these are the skills our students need to then go into jobs, regardless, again, of industry or function. Creative thinking. It's not just about being creative, although I do love the beautiful designed bottles and things like that in the room here. There's a wonderful design aesthetic here at the studio. Everything was thought about here in terms of how to creatively create a space that is a wonderful space for an event like this. It's about creative problem solving. It's about thinking about how do you develop new ideas and new approaches to challenges. We're going to talk in a minute about where our students learn. We can talk about how do we actually think about very creatively approaching giving them global experiences. But it's all about understanding the core problem and thinking about what are some creative ways to approach it. Effective communication and effective interaction, it goes without saying. Really critical skills in the workforce, but skills that often aren't taught. Most universities, students learn how to write a 5-page research paper. That is the introductory writing class in universities, and I can say that across the states. But what do they need to know today? They need to know how to blog. They need to know how to tweet. They need to know how to negotiate, how to debate, how to create multimedia presentations, how to create films, how to really communicate their stories in an effective way. These 4 core competencies is what we spend the entire first year teaching at Minerva. Every student takes the same 4 core courses the first year: a formal analysis course, an empirical analysis course, a multimodal communication course, and one on complex systems, probably one of the most creative university courses I've ever seen, which talks about second-order and third-order effects, and understanding that any decisions you make are going to have repercussions, and helping our students understand that. First year, there's no choice. Why? Because these skills are critical regardless of what a student decides to study. By their sophomore year, they will pick a major in one of our 5 colleges, and they'll go very deep into an expertise, but every student has a common language and these 4 core competencies under their belt. So if that's what they learn, how do they learn? So I have to be honest, I don't do this very often where I stand in front of a room. This is a great way to teach. It's really easy. I decide what I want to say and I just tell you. Information dissemination, super easy. Horrible way to learn. So we're not going to do this when we talk about our classroom environments. We have something called fully active learning. We've done a radically flipped classroom. So what does that mean? During every class session, every student is participating and engaging in the material. Think about that for a moment. No lectures. Every class at Minerva is a small seminar. 19 students or less with a faculty member. They do the preparation before class, so that's why we call it a radically flipped classroom. They actually read all the materials, they do assignments, they do their homework before, and when they come to class, they are put into action. We all know, again, from the science of learning, that smaller group interactions, getting engaged in the material is a really important thing. But how do you actually do it in a thoughtful, scalable way? So welcome to the Minerva classroom. Anybody, this look like the classrooms you might have gone to at university? Anyone? Anyone? So what is this? This is called the Active Learning Forum. So when we set out to think about not only what we want to educate our students on, what do we want them to be prepared to do when they graduate, we also had to think about how do we create a compelling, interactive classroom experience. We leverage a technology platform for a whole lot of reasons, but the most important is it actually makes it a better classroom experience. And even if you and I didn't go to class this way, I can tell you that for our students, it is so natural for them. So let me explain this really quickly. Across the top, you have all your students. In the very far corner there is the faculty member. You can also see her larger on the screen here. This is just one configuration. This part of the classroom here can be configured in so many different ways. And during a break, if anybody wants, I've got a little video I can share. All of these are live streams of the class, of the students in the class, and if you can get a quick glimpse of that, you'll see a very, very diverse student body. They come together, they're told exactly what are the learning objectives of today's class, and we use all kinds of techniques to engage them during class time. Everything from polls to breakout sessions to debates, all kinds of tools so that every student is actively engaged. We also are able to track their performance. Another crazy idea. The science of learning tells us the best way to learn is to get feedback. How many universities is the feedback system typically you take a midterm and a final and you get a grade? B+. Okay. At Minerva, after every class session, we give students feedback. The faculty member goes back and reviews the class and gives them grades, essentially, and feedback against a rubric of how they've done so that they can keep progressing their development. As I said, after that core curriculum, they can pick majors. And I just put this up there again just to show you 5 colleges, lots of things to choose from. If they want to go into medicine, we certainly have majors that support that. If they want to go into computer engineering, if they want to go into law, whatever it might be, there's definitely majors and concentrations to support that. So the classroom learning is important. And I start any talks about Minerva talking about the curriculum and what we teach. And I can tell you as someone who's actually gone to visit many, many universities and college tours, actually no one ever talks about the curriculum. They talk about the new sports facility that was built, how good their cafeteria food is, here's the new dorms that there are. Never talk about what they teach. So that is critically important. But what's also important is that we pair everything that happens in the classroom with real-world experiences. So the question was, how do we start educating for a global workforce of the future? We do it by taking our students around the world during the course of your 4 years. This is not an option. This is our residential program. So the students all live together. They start year 1 in San Francisco. And then every semester after that, go to another global city to learn what happens in that city, how do the governments, how do the corporations, how do the nonprofits interact, and they do projects in every single city they go to. First year in San Francisco, second year they go to Seoul and Hyderabad, to Berlin, to Buenos Aires, to London and Taipei. It's a pretty incredible way to actually go through your education, and by the way, it's cheaper than being on a college campus. Much cheaper. Okay, so what do they do in these cities? We curate all kinds of activities as part of the student experience. We don't want them just to be sitting in a classroom learning, even if the classroom is a technology-based platform. We want them out in the city doing projects, whether it's with the local Ministry of Education, whether it's with 500 startups learning how to fund venture businesses, whether it is social impact, across the board, opportunities for our students to engage. So who thrives at Minerva? Is this for everybody? That's a question I often get. Well, it's not for everybody, but what we have found is that there are students all over the world who can benefit from a program like this and will thrive and take advantage of a program like this. So for Minerva, we do go out around the world and select students who we believe will take best advantage and benefit from the education. They typically are very intellectually curious. They have the academic abilities because our program is rigorous, no doubt about it. They work very, very hard on their academics. They also often have proven already that they've got the drive to follow something they're passionate about. So they often have some pretty impressive achievements, even at the age of 17, 18, 19. They saw a need in their community, and they actually stepped up to solve that. Or they saw some opportunity to create something new. We actually have students who've already published some works. We have students who even own patents. They don't all have to be that, but we have to see that they've got something they're passionate about and can drive towards it. Just to give you a quick sense, I share this because it gives you a point of comparison. Most universities, especially in the States, pride themselves and again put diversity all over their websites, but really the percent of students that are coming from outside the US, very, very small. At Minerva, 75% of our students come from outside the US. They represent 50 different countries. Why does this matter? It matters because we want them to learn how to operate in a diverse world. We want them to work on projects with people from different places, different perspectives. If we don't set that up in this environment, we're just essentially isolating them. So I'll show you a quick few slides here. So people will ask me, does anybody care? Are there students really interested in this? So when we think about some of these ideas that we're talking about here, how do we prepare the workforce of the future? Is there interest? And I would argue yes. And if you look at something like Minerva that's just a few years old, already we've received over 50,000 applications to Minerva. So when you ask, can we change? Is it worth these discussions that you're having here today? Absolutely. Because there is a hunger for this next generation to figure out solutions, and the more opportunities we can give them, they will take advantage. And this just shows you a sense of how selective the programs are. We are very selective at Minerva. That said, it's certainly, again, showing that those who have selected decide to come. So the reason I share some of these admission slides, the interest overall, the admissions rate, and the yield, again, just speaks to the fact that students are hungering for solutions that are different from what exists today. Why does it matter? I'm going to conclude real quick with this. Well, we know what employers have told us they're looking for. We're seeing it in the results. So our students, after 8 months in just their first year, are securing really meaningful internships and opportunities. And then when we went back and asked the managers, how did they do this summer? How did they do in their internship? We got back responses that they performed better than any other interns they had at any stage in their college career. So again, 8 months at Minerva of that core learning about the critical skills, the critical thinking, creative thinking, effective communication, effective interaction, those core competencies they were able to contribute in the summer at places like this. The last thing I want to end on is just, okay, does this cost a fortune? Because that matters. And when we start thinking about who pays for this and how does it work. So I showed you that metric a little bit earlier about the students performing. And let me show you here that we've been able to reduce the costs by about half of most of the other institutions, at least within the US. How do we do it? We took out all those infrastructure costs. We took out the costs of trying to maintain a campus. We took out the cost of all the research. We believe in research, but when you talk about how are you going to educate undergrads, they don't really care how many Nobel Prize winners are at the university and how many are on payroll. What they care about is how are we learning? What are the outcomes? So we've focused all of our attention on how do we best prepare this next generation of leaders, and we're doing it at half the cost. I put this up here because, and I have a couple copies with me, because one of the things that has happened is people look at Minerva and they say, well, that's great for this really select group, and you go around the world, and that can only impact a small number of students. And the reality is we can only educate so many at our own institution. But I really believe we're onto something here, as do other universities and other governments around the world. So over the course of the last 2 years, we've had about 200 institutions ask if they can come visit us at Minerva. They want to talk to the academic team. They want to meet with students. They want to understand what we're doing. And as much as we've tried to host everybody, we realize that we should just document it. So this is a book written by 30 co-authors of the founders of Minerva. And we essentially have detailed out everything we've done, including all the habits of mind on foundational concepts. So those 100 plus are all documented in the book. And the reason we've done it is for one reason and one reason only. And that is because education matters. It really matters. And we hope that those of you who are in the academic world will take some of this, maybe take it on board. Maybe there's a way you'll up it. Come back to us and tell us some other habits and foundational concepts you want added. Come back and tell us another residential model that may work. We want to keep building as a community to try and improve how we are preparing the next generation. Thank you.